Hi, I want to talk about a few ways that you can create focal points in your collages. Just some things to consider as you're working. Maybe while you're creating, you wonder, how can I make this a little better? Or maybe it sounds more like, what should I do next? So here are a couple ideas that you can keep in mind. It will help you create focal points, like points of interest to pull your viewer into your collage. So let me just tell you briefly the ideas that I'm going to cover. One is an idea of chaos in collages. The other is contrast, also value, color, composition, but because we're actually talking about a focal point or point of interest, something that you want to highlight in your collage, we're going to think about it more as position. Isolation, and lines. These are like lines of convergence, but you could also think about this as leading your viewer. Let's talk about chaos first. Let's say that this little blue rectangle that I made, this just kind of a neat little piece of collage paper. Let's say that this is what I want my focal point to be in my collage. And I also like this, which is some collage paper that I made freehand, just painting, adding all sorts of textures. It looks really cool. I like the two of them. When I put what I want to be my focal point on here, let's move this. What I want to be my focal point on here, it gets lost. It doesn't really stand out no matter where I put it. And that's because there's so much going on in the background here that it creates chaos. So when we make collages, we need to control the chaos. If I put this focal point on a less chaotic background, now it stands out, no matter where I put it. Even though there are some words here, and there's also some texture, that chaos is not as chaotic as this. So my focal point stands out more. So if you're creating a collage, and you've got an image or something that you've created that you want to stand out on your collage, a thing to think about is controlling the chaos. If you put your image on a chaotic background, chances are it's not going to stand out very much. So that's the first thing to consider. These are all things that I think about as I'm making collages. The next one is contrast and value. So let's take a look at this. Once again, if I look at my chaotic piece, when I squint my eyes and look at this piece, my blue rectangle doesn't really stand out. Maybe here where there are lighter values, it stands out a little more, especially here, it doesn't really stand out. And that's because there are lots of different values here, and mine is not, my darker value is not really dark enough to be the darkest value, and it's not light enough to be the lightest value. When I put it here on my more subdued background, one of the other reasons that this is more compelling to look at, or just, it doesn't even have to be more compelling to look at. What it actually really is just making my focal point jump. One of the reasons that my focal point is really standing out on this piece, in addition to the fact that I lost the chaos, is also because the background is light values. When I squint my eyes, this is clearly my darkest value. I've created contrast between light and dark. We could do this in other ways too. We can create contrast with size. We can put something very small next to something very big. We can create contrast with texture, but creating that type of contrast makes a focal point jump out more, creating difference between it and the things that are around it. Lets the focal point jump and catch someone's eye. Let's talk about color. Here's another piece of collage paper that I really love. I made this one as well, and it's all these layers of paint, and I think it's so cool. I happen to love all these blues. So let's try to put my focal point on this piece, and it pretty much almost disappears. Right? There's no contrast. It kind of actually just blends in. The colors are so similar. Let's put it on a piece of orange collage paper. All of a sudden, my focal point really jumps out, and that's because the orange, there's a couple things happening. It's my darkest value, like there's a real value shift here. And also because the orange is a complementary color to the blue. And that just means that it's opposite blue on the color wheel. Okay? And so complementary colors make each other jump, they create tension and drama. So look at that difference again. So that's something you can consider when you're making collages and you want a focal point to jump out. And remember, you can have more than one focal point in a piece of work. So when you want your blue rectangle to jump out of your collage, don't put it on a blue background. You put it on an orange background, or a much lighter background, or a much darker background, okay? And let's talk about composition and position. Composition is maybe the wrong way to refer to what I'm talking about. Composition would be almost layouts that you kind of start to know and internalize, and you realize are more pleasing to your eye, and then you can create collages and pieces of art based on those compositions, and that's maybe something for a different video. Position, and they do take into account position, but for today what I want to talk about is the position of your focal point and how that can create interest for your viewer. So let's look at our focal point and our orange collage paper again. Now, if I just kind of put my paper down, a lot of times people will want to do a focal point in the center of a composition, and that's fine. That actually makes sense. Many times, that's our natural point to look for a focal point. The problem is, unless you kind of nail it, it's like get it dead center. Sometimes it seems a little bit off to the viewer, okay? For many people, in America at least, position in the upper left third of a piece is much more appealing. We call these things sweet spots. And that's just based on the rule of thirds, which is if I divide my artwork into thirds, both vertically and horizontally, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All of these points of intersection of those thirds are called sweet spots. All of a sudden, for Americans, because we read left to right, an upper left sweet spot is going to be the one that we look to most and feel like, ooh, we kind of ignite from. In other countries, it might be in different areas, but these sweet spots are places that the eye likes to go. So just positioning my focal point in a different area makes it more of a focal point. So that's something that you can think of too, is actually where you position it. Let's talk about isolation. Let's say I have a bunch of these, okay, and I want to make a collage. That's kind of okay, actually, but my focal point is lost with a bunch of other pieces. If I take it out and I isolate it from the crowd, it stands out more. With the crowd, without the crowd. Now my focal point is the focal point because it's separated and isolated from the other components. Okay? And let's talk last about lines of convergence or leading the viewer to your focal point. And that can happen in a couple of different ways. Sometimes we see that when we see like a natural path into a piece of artwork, it comes from an edge and leads us in. That can be really compelling. How you place your artwork how you place your focal point in relationship to other images in the collage can be really helpful. Think about, let's say I had a hand in my collage and I could have the finger pointing toward my focal point, right? But I could also do that by adding lines. I'm going to show you a very basic way to create a focal point with a path or lines. So let's say this is, whoa, what happened to my camera color? That's very pink. Let's see if we can change that. Because I'm not sure what happened. Let's try it again. Right, well, it's still going to be a little weird. Okay, we can still see it anyway. Actually, now you could really see contrast there for a minute. Okay, let's say we've isolated our focal point, actually from everything, and maybe we'll bring a couple little pieces in here. Right. Isolated our focal point. We've put it on a complementary color background, so it's jumping. We've eliminated the chaos that I liked so much in the beginning. And maybe we can even, I've got some lines on here from showing you the rule of thirds, but maybe I can even draw my viewer's eye to my focal point by adding more lines. And what I'm doing here is actually just creating a visual path for my viewer. That's a very basic way to do it, but it gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. Is actually creating lines to lead your viewer, creating paths to lead your viewer to your focal point. I could do it with other pieces of collage. I could lead my viewer to my piece. It just means that instead of having maybe a focal point over here and the lines are going elsewhere, or a focal point here, I can strengthen my focal point by having the lines lead the viewer to it. I hope those concepts make sense to you. So when you're working on a collage and you wish your focal point was a little stronger, you could think about these things again. Controlling the chaos, creating contrast, dark, light, big, small, playing around with colors. Are your colors too close so that your focal point is not jumping, it's not lifting? We can barely see it, maybe. Thinking about the position of your focal point. Thinking about the rule of thirds and putting it into a sweet spot. Thinking about considering isolating the focal point, just like put it out on its own and then it will be much more noticeable. And then last is thinking about creating lines or a path to your focal point with images or with mixed media, like I just did there in that very basic example. There are lots of other ways to do this, and you don't need to incorporate all those ways on one collage. But when you're creating a collage and you feel a little stuck, or you wonder what's next, or you think, how could I make it even more compelling? Or maybe you're done with your collage and it's not singing the way you want it to. Consider some of these ideas and try them out and see if they'll make your collage even, I hate to say better, but more exciting for you, because that's what's important. All right, I hope you make some wonderful collages. Take care.